$8. That's what Marcus Holland paid for a three-story mansion that everyone in Greystone, Montana said was cursed. $8 at a county tax auction where he was the only bidder brave enough or foolish enough to raise his hand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus wasn't rich. He wasn't a real estate mogul or some treasure hunter chasing ghosts. He was a 32-year-old high school history teacher who spent his weekends grading papers and coaching junior varsity basketball. But standing in front of that crumbling estate with peeling paint and shattered windows, something pulled him in. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was desperation for a fresh start after his divorce. Or maybe it was fate, because what Marcus found hidden behind a false wall in the basement wasn't just old furniture or dusty photo albums. It was a secret so valuable, so carefully buried that it had stayed silent for over 60 decades. A secret worth $89 million. And it all started with $8 and a gamble that would change everything he thought he knew about family, loyalty, and the price of truth. This isn't fiction. This is what happened when one man bought a forgotten mansion and uncovered something that powerful people spent generations trying to hide. Let's begin. Most people dream about owning a mansion. They imagine marble staircases, crystal chandeliers, and rooms so big your voice echoes when you talk. But Marcus Holland never dreamed about any of that. He dreamed about stability, a place that was his, something that didn't remind him of the apartment he used to share with his ex-wife, where every corner still whispered memories he was trying to forget. The divorce had been final for 4 months when Marcus saw the county auction notice pinned to the bulletin board at Greystone Public Library. Tax foreclosure sale, properties available. He almost walked past it. Almost. But one listing caught his eye. Lot 47, Whitmore Estate, 2891 Ashford Lane. Starting bid, $1. He knew that address. Everyone in Greystone did. The Whitmore Estate had been abandoned for as long as Marcus could remember. 3 stories of Victorian architecture slowly being devoured by ivy and time. The locals said it was haunted. Others said the Whitmore family had been into something dark before they vanished in the 1960s. No one went near it. The property had changed hands between the county and the bank so many times that eventually they just wanted it gone. Marcus did his research. He spent nights at the library digging through old property records, tax documents, and historical archives. The Whitmore family had been prominent in Greystone, wealthy industrialists who owned a chain of lumber mills across Montana and Wyoming. But in 1962, they disappeared. No forwarding address, no obituaries, just gone. The estate fell into disrepair, and over the decades, it became a ghost of what it once was. He wasn't sure why it called to him. Maybe because he was a history teacher and loved the idea of restoring something forgotten. Maybe because he needed a project, something to throw himself into so he wouldn't spend every evening staring at the walls of his empty apartment. Or maybe, deep down, he believed that broken things deserved a second chance, even if everyone else had given up on them. The auction was held on a gray Saturday morning in the county courthouse basement. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, folding chairs creaked under the weight of bargain hunters and opportunistic developers. Marcus sat in the back row, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, wondering what he was doing there. When Lot 47 came up, the auctioneer rattled off the details in a bored monotone. Whitmore Estate, 3 stories, roughly 6,200 square feet. Significant structural damage, sold as is, no warranties, no inspections, starting bid is $1. Silence. The auctioneer looked around the room. Anyone? $1? Marcus felt his hand start to raise before his brain caught up. He hesitated. This was insane. He was a teacher. He didn't know the first thing about renovations or managing a property that size. But then he thought about his ex-wife telling him he never took risks, that he played it safe, that he was boring. His hand went up. "We have $1, the auctioneer said, almost surprised. "Do I hear 2? Nothing. Going once, twice. The gavel came down. Sold for $1 to bidder Parsons. But that wasn't the final price. After taxes, fees, and administrative costs, the total came to $8. Marcus walked out of that courthouse holding a deed to a mansion he'd never set foot in, his heart pounding like he just made the best or worst decision of his life. He didn't tell anyone at first. Not his colleagues, not his friends, definitely not his ex-wife, who would have laughed and called him reckless. He just drove out to Ashford Lane on the following Sunday, parked his beat-up Honda Civic in the overgrown driveway, and stood there, staring up at the house. It was worse than he had imagined. The roof sagged in places, windows were either broken or boarded up, the front porch looked like it might collapse if you breathed on it too hard. Vines had claimed the entire east side of the building, wrapping around columns and creeping through cracks in the foundation. It looked like something out of a horror movie. He grabbed a flashlight from his car and approached cautiously. The front door was unlocked, or more accurately, the lock had rusted through. It swung open with a groan that sounded almost human. Dust particles danced in the beams of afternoon light that pierced through the broken windows. The air smelt of mildew, rotting wood, and decades of abandonment. He stepped inside.
The foyer was grand once. You could still see the bones of it. The wide staircase, the ornate crown molding, the faded wallpaper that might have been beautiful 60 years ago. But now it was just decay. Floorboards buckled under his weight. Paint peeled in long strips. A chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, half its crystals missing. Marcus wandered through the first floor, flashlight cutting through the gloom. The living room, the dining room, a kitchen with appliances from another era. Everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. It felt like walking through a time capsule, except instead of being preserved, it had been left to rot. He climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. The second floor had bedrooms, 5 of them, each one emptier than the last. Furniture was sparse. A bed frame here, a dresser there. Nothing personal, no photos, no clothes. It was like the Whitmores had stripped the place before they left. But it was the third floor that stopped him cold. The attic access was a narrow door at the end of the hallway. It was locked, not with a modern lock, but an old iron deadbolt that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Marcus pulled out his keys, but none of them fit. He made a mental note to bring bolt cutters next time. As he turned to leave, his flashlight caught something, a faint outline on the wall near the basement door. He moved closer. It wasn't just a stain or water damage. It was a seam, a nearly invisible line that ran floor to ceiling about 3 feet wide. Marcus pressed his palm against it. The wall felt different, hollow. His pulse quickened. He pushed harder, and the wall shifted slightly like it wasn't fully secured. He ran his fingers along the seam until he found a small indentation, a hidden latch. He pulled. The wall swung open. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Not the main basement. Something else. Something hidden. Marcus stood there, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand, staring into the black void below. Every instinct told him to leave, to close the wall and pretend he hadn't found it. But he didn't, because Marcus Holland had spent his whole life playing it safe, and for once, he wanted to know what was on the other side of fear. He descended into the dark, one step at a time, with no idea that he was about to uncover a secret that would rewrite everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The steps were stone, worn smooth in the center from decades, maybe centuries of footsteps. Marcus counted them as he descended. 12, 13, 14. The air grew colder with each step, thick with a dampness that clung to his lungs. His flashlight beam barely cut through the darkness ahead. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a room. Not a basement, Not a cellar, a chamber. It was roughly 20 feet square with brick walls that looked far older than the mansion above. The ceiling was vaulted, reinforced with iron beams that had rusted orange over time. But what stopped Marcus in his tracks wasn't the architecture. It was what filled the room. Filing cabinets. Dozens of them. Metal, industrial grade, lined up against the walls like soldiers at attention. In the center sat a massive oak desk, its surface buried under stacks of leather-bound ledgers, yellow documents, and what looked like blueprints rolled and tied with string. A single chair sat behind the desk, as if waiting for someone to return. Marcus approached slowly, his footsteps echoing off the brick. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but not as thick as upstairs. This room had been sealed, protected, hidden intentionally. He set his flashlight on the desk and opened the first ledger. The handwriting was meticulous. Dates, names, numbers, page after page of transactions recorded in fountain pen. The ink faded but still legible. The first entry was dated March 1931. Received, $47,000. Deposit from AR. Investment secured. He flipped through more pages. The amounts grew larger. $50,000. $80,000. By 1935, there were entries for over $200,000, a staggering sum for that era. But there were no names attached to the deposits, just initials. AR, JL, MK, WB. He moved to the filing cabinets and pulled open the first drawer. Inside were folders, each one labeled with a year. He selected 1940 and spread the contents across the desk. Photographs. Dozens of them. Black and white images of men in suits shaking hands, standing in front of buildings, sitting in boardrooms. He recognized some of the locations: the Greystone courthouse, the old railway station, the bank that had closed in the 1980s. But the faces were unfamiliar. Except one. In a photo dated 1947, a tall man with sharp features stood at the center of a group, his hand on the shoulder of another man wearing a mayor's sash. The tall man's face was stern, commanding, and written on the back of the photo in the same meticulous handwriting, J.W., Securing Western Expansion. J.W. Jonathan Whitmore.
The deeds weren't in the Whitmore name. They were registered to shell companies, names that sounded legitimate but meant nothing. Mountain Ridge Holdings, Northern Timber Collective, Greystone Development Corporation. Each one listed different addresses, different officers, but the signatures at the bottom were always the same: Jonathan Whitmore, or his attorney, or his business partner, a man named Victor Fashford. Marcus opened another ledger, this one labeled Investments, Private Accounts. Inside was a list of names, real names this time, alongside sums of money that made his stomach turn. Senators, judges, state legislators, businessmen from across the region. Each one had received payments, some monthly, some annually, all recorded with the same cold precision. This wasn't just wealth. This was control. The Whitmores hadn't just owned lumber mills. They'd owned people, influence, power. They'd built an empire not through honest business, but through strategic payoffs, backroom deals, and carefully constructed networks of obligation. Marcus sat down heavily in the chair, dust rising around him. He thought about his students, how he taught them about the robber barons of the late 1800s and early 1900s, men who built fortunes on the backs of workers and manipulated systems for personal gain. He'd always talked about them like they were distant history, relics of a less ethical time. But here it was, right in front of him, still hidden,
still secret. He pulled out his phone to take pictures, but saw he had no signal this deep underground. He'd have to come back with a camera. He'd have to document everything. But even as he thought it, a knot formed in his chest. Why had this been hidden? Why hadn't the Whitmores destroyed it when they left? Unless they didn't leave willingly. Marcus stood and moved to the far corner of the room, where a smaller cabinet sat, different from the others. It was locked, but the key hung on a nail driven into the wall beside it, like whoever had been here last knew they weren't coming back, and wanted someone, someday, to find this. He unlocked the cabinet. Inside were 3 things. First, a leather satchel. He opened it carefully. Stacks of old bills, currency from the 1950s and 60s. He didn't count it, but it had to be at least $50,000. Useless now as legal tender, but valuable to collectors. Second, a sealed envelope, addressed simply, "To whoever finds this." Marcus's hands trembled as he broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was shaky, hurried, completely different from the ledgers. "My name is Jonathan Whitmore, and if you're reading this, then I am either dead or gone. What you found here is proof of a system I helped build and came to regret. We thought we were creating prosperity, but we created chains. I tried to walk away, to expose it, but they wouldn't let me. They said families like mine don't just leave. They disappear. So I hid the evidence. I hid the truth, in the hopes that one day someone braver than I was would bring it into the light. I pray you have the courage I lacked." The letter was dated November 14th, 1962, 3 weeks before the Whitmores vanished from public record. Marcus read it twice, then a third time. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in the silence of the chamber. Jonathan Whitmore hadn't abandoned this place. He'd been running, or hiding. And whatever system he'd tried to expose, it was still out there, still powerful enough that he felt the need to bury the evidence rather than go public. Marcus carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then he reached for the third item in the cabinet. It was a small metal lock box, no bigger than a shoebox. The key was taped to the top. He unlocked it. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, were 3 things that made his breath catch. A single stock certificate, dated 1959, for 100,000 shares of something called Continental Mining Consortium. The certificate was signed by Jonathan Whitmore as majority shareholder. A handwritten note clipped to it. "They don't know about this one. It's clean. It's yours if you're reading this. Use it wisely." And finally, a business card. Crisp, white, with a name and phone number printed in black ink. Eleanor Hartley, estate attorney, Denver, Colorado. On the back, written in pen, "She knows everything. Trust her." Marcus stared at the stock certificate. Continental Mining Consortium. He'd never heard of it. But if Jonathan Whitmore had hidden it here, separate from everything else, with a note that said it was clean, it meant something. He pulled out his phone again. Still no signal. He'd have to get back upstairs. Research this. Figure out what he'd just inherited along with an $8 mansion. But as he gathered the lockbox, the letter, and a few of the most crucial documents, one thought echoed in his mind. Jonathan Whitmore had left this for someone to find. Not his family, not his partners. Someone outside the system. And now Marcus Holland, A high school history teacher who'd bought a cursed mansion on a whim was holding 89 reasons to finish what a dead man had started. He just had to figure out how to do it without disappearing like the Whitmores did. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table in his small apartment, the lockbox open in front of him, the stock certificate under the glow of his desk lamp. He'd photographed every document he could carry from the hidden chamber, and now his laptop screen flickered with search results. Continental Mining Consortium. The company had been founded in 1955, initially as a small operation exploring copper deposits in Nevada. But by the early 1960s, it had expanded rapidly, acquiring mining rights across the western United States, from Arizona to Montana. Then, in 1968, something changed. The company went quiet. No public filings, no news articles. It simply vanished from record. Or so it seemed. Marcus dug deeper, following a trail of breadcrumbs through archived business journals and old securities filings. In 1972, Continental Mining Consortium had been quietly absorbed by a larger corporation, Silver Point Industries. And Silver Point was still very much alive. In fact, it was now one of the largest private mining and mineral extraction companies in North America, with operations spanning 3 continents. He cross-referenced the stock certificate, 100,000 shares of Continental Mining, dated 1959. If those shares had been converted during the merger with Silver Point, and if they had appreciated over the decades, Marcus opened a financial calculator and started running numbers. His hands shook as the figures appeared on screen. $89 million. Give or take a few million, depending on current market valuation. He sat back, breathless. Jonathan Whitmore had left behind a fortune. Not in cash, not in property, in stock. Hidden stock that no one knew existed. Clean, as the note had said. Separate from the corruption documented in those ledgers. But there was a problem. The stock certificate was in Jonathan Whitmore's name. The man had been declared legally dead in 1975, after being missing for over a decade, which meant the shares, technically, belonged to his estate. And Marcus had no idea who the legal heirs were, or if there even were any. That's when he remembered the business card. Eleanor Hartley, estate attorney, Denver, Colorado. He checked the time, 2:47 a.m. Too late to call, but he sent an email anyway, brief and vague, asking if she was still practicing and if she had any knowledge of the Whitmore estate. He didn't mention the stock, not yet, not until he knew who he was dealing with. The response came at 6:13 a.m. Mr. Holland, I've been waiting for someone to contact me about the Whitmore matter for over 30 years. We need to speak immediately. Not by email, not by phone, in person. Can you be in Denver by tomorrow afternoon? This is urgent. E.H. Marcus stared at the message. She'd been waiting for 30 years. He called in sick to work, threw some clothes in a duffel bag, and by 9 a.m. he was on the road. Greystone to Denver was a 7-hour drive through mountain passes and sprawling high plains. He had plenty of time to think, plenty of time to question whether he was walking into something dangerous. But he kept driving. Eleanor Hartley's office was in a modest building in downtown Denver, sandwiched between a coffee shop and a bookstore. No flashy sign, no corporate branding, just a brass plate beside the door. Hartley and Associates, Estate Law. He climbed the stairs to the second floor and knocked. The woman who opened the door was in her late 70s, silver hair pulled back in a nice bun, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked him up and down, then stepped aside, without a word. Her office was exactly what he expected, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk covered in case files, and the faint smell of old paper and leather. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Show me what you found," she said. "No pleasantries, no small talk."
Marcus hesitated, then pulled the lockbox from his bag and placed it on the desk. He opened it slowly, revealing the stock certificate, Jonathan's letter, and the business card with her name on it. Eleanor picked up the certificate with careful hands, holding it up to the light. Her expression didn't change, but Marcus saw her jaw tighten. He actually did it. He kept his word. "You knew about this?" Marcus asked. She set the certificate down and looked at him with an intensity that made him sit back. "I was Jonathan Whitmore's attorney for 3 years before he disappeared. He came to me in 1961, terrified. Said he wanted to set things right, expose the network he'd helped build. But he knew they'd never let him. So he made a plan. He liquidated certain assets quietly, purchased this stock under a shell name, then transferred it back to himself through a private transaction that no one else knew about. It was his insurance policy, his way of making sure that if something happened to him, the truth could still come out." "What truth?" Marcus pressed. Eleanor stood and walked to the window, her back to him. Jonathan Whitmore was not just a businessman. He was the architect of the largest political bribery network in the western United States. For over 2 decades, he and a group of industrialists funneled money to governors, senators, judges, and regulators. They controlled mining rights, lumber contracts, water access, and land development. Anything that required government approval, they owned the people who gave it. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The ledgers, the files in the hidden chamber. Yes, he kept records of everything, every payment, every deal, every name. He told me it was his leverage, his way of staying alive. But eventually, he realized it wasn't enough. They were going to silence him. So he contacted me, told me to wait, that one day someone would find the estate, find the evidence, and when they did, I was to help them. Help them do what? She turned to face me. Finish what he started, expose the network, reclaim the stock, and use the money to make things right. Marcus shook his head. That was 60 years ago. Those people are probably dead.
"The people are dead," Eleanor said coldly. "But the system isn't. Silver Point Industries, the company that absorbed Continental Mining, it's run by the grandchildren and protégés of the men Jonathan paid off. They've built empires on foundations of corruption, and they've gotten very good at hiding it. If you go public with this, if you try to claim that stock, they'll come for you. Just like they came for Jonathan." Marcus's mouth went dry. "What happened to him? To the Whitmore family?" Eleanor's face softened just slightly. "I don't know. He called me on November 30th, 1962. Said he was taking his wife and daughter and disappearing. He wouldn't tell me where. Said it was safer if I didn't know. That was the last time I ever heard his voice." The room fell silent. Marcus looked down at the stock certificate. $89 million, a fortune built on secrets and blood money, hidden away by a man who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. "Why didn't you come forward?" Marcus asked quietly. "Why wait for someone to find it?" Eleanor sat back down, folding her hands on the desk. "Because Jonathan made me promise. He said the evidence had to be discovered, not delivered. He believed that if someone stumbled onto it, if they found it on their own, it would mean they were meant to carry it forward, that they'd have the courage he didn't. So now I'm asking you, Mr. Holland, what are you going to do?" Marcus stared at her. He thought about his quiet life, his students, his small apartment, the safety of routine. He thought about his ex-wife's words, that he never took risks, that he played it safe. And then he thought about Jonathan Whitmore, a man who'd tried to walk away from power and corruption, who'd left behind a trail of breadcrumbs, hoping someone someday would be brave enough to follow it. "I want to claim the stock," Marcus said, his voice steady. "And I want to expose what he found. All of it." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file. Then we have work to do. But I need you to understand something, Marcus. The moment we file for ownership of those shares, the moment Silvercoin realizes what we have, they'll come after you. They'll dig into your life, discredit you, threaten you. They've done it before. They'll do it again. Marcus swallowed hard. What do we do? Eleanor smiled, sharp and determined. We build a case so airtight they can't touch it. We find allies. We go public before they can bury it. And we make sure that this time the truth doesn't disappear. She slid a document across the desk. Sign this, it makes me your attorney, and then we start fighting back. Marcus picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the paper for just a second. Then he signed. He'd bought a mansion for $8. Now he was buying a war, and he had no intention of losing. The legal process was slower than Marcus expected. Eleanor explained that claiming stock from a deceased person's estate, especially stock that had been hidden for 6 decades, required meticulous documentation. They needed to prove the certificate was authentic, establish the chain of ownership, and demonstrate that Marcus, as the legal owner of the Whitmore property, had rightful claim to everything found within it. It's going to take months, Eleanor warned him during their second meeting. Maybe longer. We need to be patient, methodical. One mistake and they'll tear us apart in court. Marcus returned to Greystone, but nothing felt the same. He went back to teaching, standing in front of his classroom talking about the Industrial Revolution and the Progressive Era, but his mind was elsewhere. He'd glance at his students and wonder if any of them would believe him if he told them what he'd found. A hidden fortune, a conspiracy that stretched back generations, a fight against one of the most powerful corporations in the country. He kept the documents locked in a safe deposit box at the bank. He told no one except Eleanor. Not his colleagues, not his friends, especially not his ex-wife, who'd started texting him again asking if he wanted to talk things through. He ignored her messages. But keeping secrets has a weight, and he felt it pressing down on him every day. 3 weeks after his trip to Denver, something changed. He noticed the car first, a dark blue sedan parked across the street from his apartment. It was there when he left for work in the morning, still there when he came home at night. Different car, same spot. A black USV the next day, then a gray truck. He told himself he was being paranoid, that the stress was getting to him, but then he found the notice. It was taped to his apartment door when he got home on a Thursday evening. Official letterhead from the Greystone County Tax Assessor's Office. Notice of property reassessment, Whitmore Estate, 2891 Ashford Lane. His hands shook as he read it. The county was reassessing the property value, and according to their updated evaluation, the mansion was now worth $340,000, which meant his tax prices would jump from less than $100 a year to over $8,000, retroactive for 3 years. Marcus did the math. They were demanding over $24,000 in back taxes, money he didn't have, and if he couldn't pay, the county could seize the property, which meant losing access to the hidden chamber, losing everything. He called Eleanor immediately. They know, she said, her voice grim. Someone tipped them off. They're trying to force you out. How is this legal?
It's not about legal, Marcus. It's about pressure. They'll bury you in bureaucracy, bleed you dry with fees and reassessments until you have no choice but to walk away. What do I do? There was a pause. Fight it. File an appeal. I'll send you the paperwork. But Marcus, this is just the beginning. If they're moving this fast, it means they're scared, which means we're on to something big. The appeal process was a nightmare. Marcus spent his evenings filling out forms, gathering evidence, proving that the mansion was barely habitable and nowhere near worth the county's inflated assessment. He took photos of the rotting floors, the collapsed ceilings, the foundation cracks. He hired an independent appraiser who valued the property at $43,000, barely more than what he'd paid.
But every document he submitted was met with delays, requests for additional information, scheduling conflicts for hearings. It was like fighting a ghost. Every time he got close to resolution, the goalposts moved. And then the rumors started. At school, colleagues began avoiding him. Conversations would stop when he entered the teacher's lounge. One afternoon, Principal Caldwell called him into her office. "Marcus, I need to ask you something." She folded her hands on her desk, her expression carefully neutral. "Are you involved in some kind of legal trouble?" His stomach dropped. "What? No. Why?" "I received a call yesterday. Someone from the district office asking questions about you, your conduct, your financial situation, whether you'd been behaving erratically." Marcus's felt heat rise in his chest. "That's insane. Who called?" "They didn't leave a name. But Marcus," she leaned forward, "if there's something going on, you need to tell me. I can't protect you if I don't know what I'm dealing with." He wanted to tell her everything, but Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. "Trust no one until this is over." "There's nothing going on," he said, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Someone's made a mistake. I'll handle it." She didn't look convinced, but she let him go. That night, Marcus sat in the dark of his apartment, staring at his phone. The pressure was building, the walls were closing in, and he hadn't even filed the official claim for the stock yet. He thought about giving up, selling the mansion, walking away from all of it, going back to his quiet, unremarkable life. But then he remembered Jonathan Whitmore's letter. "I pray you have the courage I lacked." Marcus stood, grabbed his jacket, and drove to the mansion. It was past midnight when he arrived. The building loomed against the night sky, dark and silent. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside, flashlight cutting through the blackness. He went straight to the hidden chamber. The files were still there, untouched. He sat at the old desk and opened one of the ledgers, reading through the entries again. Names, dates, payments, proof of a system built on corruption and greed. And then he saw something he'd missed before. Tucked into the back of one ledger was a folded piece of paper. He opened it carefully. It was a list, handwritten, titled "The Circle, Active Members." There were 12 names. Some he recognized from the old photographs. State senators, business magnates, county officials. But 3 names at the bottom made his blood run cold. Governor Paul Hendricks, 1978 to 1986. Senator Monica Prescott, current. James Calloway, SEO, Silver Point Industries. The governor was dead, but Senator Prescott was still in office, and James Calloway, he ran Silver Point, the company that now controlled the continental mining stock Marcus was trying to claim. These weren't just historical names, this was a living network. Marcus photographed the list with trembling hands. Then he noticed something else at the bottom of the page in different ink added later. They'll protect the system at all costs, even if it means eliminating threats. J.W. He sat back, his heart pounding. Jonathan Whitmore hadn't just been afraid, he'd been targeted, and now Marcus was walking the same path. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging. You don't know what you're playing with." He stared at the screen. Then another message came through. "The mansion, the stock. Walk away. Last warning." His first instinct was fear. But then something else rose up inside him. Anger. Pure, burning anger. They thought they could intimidate him, thought they could scare him into silence like they'd done to Jonathan, like they'd probably done to countless others over the decades. But Marcus wasn't Jonathan Whitmore. He didn't have a family to protect. He didn't have a fortune to lose. All he had was the truth and a stubborn refusal to let powerful people bury it. He typed a response. No. Then he forwarded the messages to Eleanor, along with a photo of the list. Her reply came within minutes. Get out of that house, now. Come to Denver. We're accelerating the timeline. Marcus grabbed the ledger with the list, locked the chamber, and left. As he drove away from the Whitmore estate, he checked his rearview mirror. A car pulled out from a side street and began following him. He didn't speed up, didn't try to lose them. He just kept driving, steady and deliberate, all the way back to his apartment. Let them follow. Let them watch. Let them know he wasn't backing down. Because Marcus Holland had just declared war, and he had every intention of winning. Marcus didn't go to Denver immediately. Instead, he did something Eleanor would have told him not to do. He went looking for answers about the Whitmore family's disappearance. If Jonathan Whitmore had vanished in 1962, someone had to remember, someone had to know what really happened. Greystone was a small town, and small towns had long memories.
He started at the Greystone Historical Society, a cramped building that doubled as a museum for local artifacts and old photographs. The curator was a woman named Diane Frost, probably in her 60s, with reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. I'm researching the Whitmore family, Marcus said, specifically their disappearance in 1962. Diane's expression shifted, something between curiosity and caution. You're the one who bought the estate. News traveled fast. Yes, ma'am. She studied him for a moment, then gestured for him to follow her to a back room lined with filing cabinets and storage boxes. She pulled out a box labeled 1960-1965 and set it on a table. The official story is that Jonathan Whitmore moved his family out of state for business reasons, but my mother told me something different. Diane opened the box and began sifting through newspaper clippings. She worked at the Greystone Gazette back then, said there was a story they were told not to print. About what? Diane pulled out a yellowed clipping and handed it to him. It was dated December 3rd, 1962. The headline read, "Local family relocates, Whitmore estate to remain vacant." This ran, Diane said, but there was another version, one that got killed by the editor after he received a phone call from someone in the state capitol. My mother kept a draft. She handed him a piece of paper, typewritten and faded. The headline was different. "Whitmore family vanishes. Authorities decline investigation." Marcus's pulse quickened as he read. The article described how neighbors reported seeing the Whitmore family hurriedly packing their car in the middle of the night, how Jonathan had paid cash for his property taxes years in advance, the day before they left, how the sheriff had been asked to investigate, but was ordered to stand down by unnamed officials. "Your mother wrote this?" Diane nodded. She was young, ambitious, thought she was going to break a big story, but the editor killed it, told her to drop it or find a new job. She dropped it, but she never forgot. "Is she still alive? Can I talk to her?" Diane's face fell. "She passed 8 years ago, but before she died, she told me to keep that draft. Said someday someone might come asking, someone who needed to know the truth." Marcus felt a chill run through him. "Did she say anything else?" "Just one thing. She said Jonathan Whitmore wasn't a bad man. He was a scared man, and that the people who scare him were still out there." Marcus left the Historical Society with the draft article and a growing sense that he wasn't alone in this fight. There were people, ordinary people, who had been carrying pieces of this story for decades, waiting for someone to put them together. His next stop was the county clerk's office. He needed to understand the property tax reassessment, find out who had ordered it and why. The clerk on duty was a young woman named Rachel Kim,
barely out of college, who looked exhausted from dealing with bureaucratic complaints all day. "I need to file a formal inquiry about a property reassessment," Marcus said, sliding the notice across the counter. Rachel glanced at it and frowned. "Whitmore Estate. Yeah, I remember this one. It was flagged for reassessment about a month ago." "Flagged by who?" She typed something into her computer. "Doesn't say, just shows an anonymous request for review, but—" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Between you and me, this whole thing felt weird. We don't usually reassess properties that aggressively unless there's new development or a sale. And from what I can see, nothing's changed with that property in 60 years. Can you find out who requested it?" She bit her lip. "I could lose my job." Marcus leaned in. "Someone is trying to take that property from me using illegal pressure tactics. If I lose it, evidence of political corruption going back decades disappears with it. I'm not asking you to break the law. I'm asking you to help me find out who's breaking it." She stared at him, then glanced around the office. No one was paying attention. She turned back to her screen and started typing. She hurshed her neck. "There's a digital trail. Every request gets logged with an IP address and a user ID. Give me a second." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Then she stopped, her eyes widening. That's impossible." "What?" She turned the screen slightly so he could see. "The request came from an internal county account, but the IP address traces back to a law firm in Helena, Ballard and Race." Marcus didn't recognize the name, but he pulled out his phone and took a photo of the screen. "Do you know them?" Rachel asked. "No, but I'm going to find out." She quickly closed the window. "You didn't get this from me. I was never here." Marcus walked out of the clerk's office with a new lead. Back in his car, he called Eleanor. "Ballard and Reese," I said. "Ever heard of them?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Where did you hear that name?" "They're the ones who triggered the property reassessment." "Who are they?" "They're Silver Point's legal team," Eleanor said slowly. "High-powered corporate attorneys. If they're involved, it means Silver Point knows about the stock. They're moving to protect their interests." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. "How would they know?" I don't know, but we need to assume someone talked, or someone's been watching. What do we do?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said, "We go public. Sooner than I wanted, but we don't have a choice. I'll start drafting the official stock claim. You need to find a journalist, someone trustworthy, someone who can't be bought." "I don't know any journalists." "Then find one, because once we file that claim, this becomes a public fight, and we need the story out there before they can spin it." Marcus hung up and sat in his car thinking. A journalist? Someone who couldn't be bought. Someone brave enough to take on one of the most powerful corporations in the country. Then it hit him. He pulled up his phone and searched for investigative reporters in Montana. One name kept appearing. Owen Fletcher, a freelance journalist who'd broken stories about corruption in state government, environmental violations by mining companies, and cover-ups in law enforcement. He'd been sued twice and won both times. Marcus found his email and typed a message. "Mr. Fletcher, my name is Marcus Holland. I've uncovered evidence of a political bribery network spanning 6 decades, involving current government officials and a major corporation. I have documents, ledgers, and proof. I need someone who can tell the story without being silenced. Are you that person?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The reply came 30 minutes later. "Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m., Bitterroot Diner, Missoula. Come alone, bring proof." Marcus exhaled slowly. He was building a team. An attorney who'd waited 30 years for this moment. A clerk willing to risk her job. A curator who'd kept her mother's secrets. And now a journalist with a reputation for taking down powerful people. For the first time since he'd found the hidden chamber, Marcus didn't feel alone.
That night, he returned to his apartment and found another message taped to his door. Not a text this time, a physical note, written on expensive stationery. Mr. Holland, we represent Silver Point Industries. We're prepared to offer you $500,000 for the Whitmore estate and all contents therein. This is a generous offer for a property in significant disrepair. We urge you to consider it carefully. This offer expires in 72 hours. It was signed by someone from Ballard and Reese. $500,000. More money than Marcus had ever seen in his life. Enough to pay off his debts, start over, forget any of this ever happened. He read the note twice. Then he walked to his kitchen, held it over the sink, and lit it on fire with a match. He watched it burn, the edges curling black, the words disappearing into ash. They thought they could buy him, thought money would make him walk away. But Marcus Holland wasn't for sale, and tomorrow he was going to make sure the whole world knew it. The Bitterroot Diner in Missoula was exactly the kind of place you'd expect for a clandestine meeting. Vinyl booths, checkered floors, and waitresses who'd seen enough in their lives not to ask questions. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, ordered coffee he didn't drink, and waited. Owen Fletcher walked in at exactly 2 p.m. He was younger than Marcus expected, maybe 40, with the kind of tired eyes that came from chasing stories no one else wanted to touch. He slid into the booth without introducing himself. "Show me what you have." Marcus pulled out a folder containing copies of the ledgers, photographs of the documents, the list of circle members, and Jonathan Whitmore's confession letter. He spread them across the table like playing cards. Owen picked up the first ledger page, his eyes scanning the entries. Then the photographs. Then the letter. His expression didn't change, but Marcus saw his jaw tighten. "How do I know these are real?" "Because I'll take you to the mansion. You can see the hidden chamber yourself, photograph everything, verify it independently." Owen looked up. "And what do you want from me?" "I want you to tell the story, the whole story, before they bury it. They'll come after you. You know that, right? Silver Point has lawyers, political connections, money. They'll destroy your credibility, dig up every mistake you've ever made, paint you as a fraud or a lunatic." He met his gaze. "I know. But if I don't do this, then Jonathan Whitmore died for nothing. And every person who was silenced over the last 60 years stays forgotten." Owen studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the documents. "I'll need exclusive access, complete transparency, and I'm going to fact-check everything. I mean everything. If even one detail doesn't line up, I'm out." "Agreed." Owen slid the documents back across the table. "When can we go to the mansion?" "Tonight." They drove separately to Greystone, arriving just after sunset. The Whitmore estate looked even more ominous in the fading light, shadows stretching across the overgrown lawn like fingers. Marcus led Owen inside, flashlight in hand, straight to the hidden wall panel. Owen watched as Marcus triggered the latch and the wall swung open, revealing the narrow staircase. They descended together into the chamber. For the next 3 hours, Owen photographed everything. Every ledger, every file cabinet, every document. He asked questions, cross-referenced names, took notes in a battered notebook. Marcus watched him work with a mix of relief and anxiety. When they finally climbed back upstairs, Owen was quiet for a long time. "This is bigger than I thought," he said. "This isn't just historical corruption. If those names on the circle list are accurate, if Senator Prescott and James Calloway are connected to this is active, ongoing criminal conspiracy." "Can you prove it?" "With what you've given me, maybe. But I'll need corroboration, other sources, people willing to go on record." I have someone. Eleanor Hartley. She was Jonathan Whitmore's attorney. She's been waiting decades to tell this story. Owen nodded slowly. Then we move fast. I'll start writing tonight, but Marcus, once this breaks, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same. Marcus thought about his quiet existence, his classroom, his students, the simplicity he'd once craved.
"I know," he said, "but staying silent isn't living. It's just existing." Owen extended his hand. "Then let's make some noise." The article dropped 5 days later. Owen published it on a national investigative journalism platform that had broken major stories before, the kind of outlet that couldn't be intimidated or silenced. The headline was damning. "The Whitmore Files: How an $8 million mansion purchase exposed 60 years of political corruption and an $89 million cover-up." The story was meticulous. Owen had verified every detail, interviewed Eleanor on record, included photographs of the documents, and traced the connections between the original Circle members and current power structures. He named names. He followed money trails. He exposed the network. Within hours, it went viral. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Whitmore Files. Hashtag Justice for Jonathan. Hashtag 89 million secret. Marcus's phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Lawyers called offering representation. Strangers sent messages of support and threats. But the most important call came from the Montana Attorney General's office. "Mr. Holland, this is Deputy AG Catherine Voss. We'd like to discuss the documents you've uncovered. We're opening a formal investigation into the allegations in Mr. Fletcher's article." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "An investigation into Silver Point?" "Into all parties named in the documents, including Senator Prescott. We take these allegations very seriously." Eleanor had been right. Going public changed everything. Senator Prescott held a press conference 2 days later, denying any connection to the historical bribery network. She called the documents fabricated, and Marcus an opportunist seeking attention and money. But her voice wavered. Her eyes darted. And when reporters asked about specific transactions listed in the ledgers, she ended the conference abruptly. Silver Point Industries released a statement claiming they had no knowledge of Continental Mining's alleged connection to any corrupt activities and that they would cooperate fully with any investigation. But behind the scenes, their lawyers were scrambling. The property tax reassessment? Quietly withdrawn. The offer to buy the mansion? Rescinded. The anonymous threats? Stopped. Because now the world was watching. 3 weeks after Owen's article published, Eleanor filed the official claim for the Continental Mining stock on Marcus's behalf. The legal argument was airtight. Marcus owned the property. Jonathan Whitmore had left the stock certificate on that property with explicit instructions for the finder, and there were no living heirs to contest the claim. Silver Point fought it hard. They brought in teams of attorneys, argued that the stock certificate was invalid, claimed Marcus had no legal standing. But Eleanor had spent 30 years preparing for this fight. She was ready. The judge ruled in Marcus's favor. The stock, now converted to Silver Point shares, was legally his. $89 million minus taxes and legal fees. Still more money than Marcus had ever imagined. But he didn't keep it. Standing on the steps of the courthouse with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions, Marcus made an announcement. "This money was built on corruption, on the backs of people who were silenced and exploited. So I'm giving it back. I'm establishing the Whitmore Justice Foundation, a fund dedicated to investigating historical corruption, supporting whistleblowers, and providing legal assistance to those fighting powerful institutions. every dollar will go toward making sure what happened to Jonathan Whitmore and countless others never happens again." The crowd erupted. Eleanor stood beside him, tears in her eyes. Owen Fletcher captured it all. That night, Marcus returned to the mansion one last time. He walked through the empty rooms, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He thought about Jonathan Whitmore, about the fear that had driven him into hiding, about the courage it took to leave behind a trail of truth. He stood in the hidden chamber, now empty of its secrets, and whispered into the darkness, "I finished it. You can rest now." The house seemed to sigh, as if something long held captive had finally been released. Marcus locked the mansion and drove away. He didn't look back. 6 months later, the Whitmore estate was transformed, not into a private residence, but into a public archive and education center. The hidden chamber became a museum exhibit, preserving the documents for future generations. The foundation funded dozens of investigations into corruption, helped expose 2 additional bribery networks, and provided support to whistleblowers across the country. Senator Prescott resigned under pressure and was indicted on charges related to the original investigation. James Calloway stepped down as CEO of Silverpoint. The system Jonathan Whitmore had tried to expose was finally crumbling. As for Marcus, he went back to teaching. But he was different now. He stood a little taller, spoke a little louder, and when he taught his students about courage, about integrity, about the power of ordinary people to change the world, he spoke from experience.
Because Marcus Holland had bought a ruined mansion for $8 and found something worth far more than $89 million. He found his purpose. He found his voice. And he proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay silent even when the whole world wants you to. The truth doesn't always win, but when it does, it changes everything. Marcus's story reminds us that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. It's about ordinary people who stumble onto extraordinary truths and decide that silence isn't an option. Jonathan Whitmore spent his life trapped by the system he helped create, but he left behind a gift, a chance for someone else to finish what he started. And Marcus Holland, a small-town teacher who never thought he was anything special, became the person who carried that truth into the light. Because sometimes all it takes is $8 and the refusal to look away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.